Morning in northern Minnesota arrived without ceremony. Light spilled across the frozen lake in sheets of pale silver, turning the world into something clean and quiet and merciless. The kind of cold that bit through layers and found bone. Garrett Stone stood alone on the porch of his rented cabin, breath visible in the thin air, hands wrapped around a shovel handle worn smooth by years of use. Snow had fallen overnight, 3 inches of fresh powder burying the path he'd cleared the day before. He started again. Scrape, lift, throw. The rhythm was familiar, almost meditative. If he kept moving, he didn't have to think. Behind him, through the frosted window, his daughter watched. Lily was 8 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that fell to her shoulders and gray eyes that seemed too old for her face. She sat at the kitchen table, cereal untouched, watching her father work with the kind of quiet observation children develop when they've learned that adults don't always want to be interrupted. She didn't wave. He didn't turn around. This was their routine now. 2 years of routines built around the absence of someone who used to fill the spaces between them. Garrett was 31 but felt decades older. Navy SEAL for 9 years, discharged honorably after his wife's diagnosis. Melanoma stage 4 discovered too late. 18 months of treatment that drained their savings and left him with medical debt that climbed faster than he could pay it down. She died on a Tuesday morning in April, holding his hand, telling him to take care of their girl. He'd promised. He wasn't sure he was keeping that promise. The dog appeared at his feet without sound. Maverick, a golden retriever with a coat that caught the morning light like brushed gold, pressed his shoulder against Garrett's leg. The dog had been his wife's therapy animal during treatment, trained to sense distress and provide comfort. Now Maverick followed Garrett everywhere, as if afraid he might disappear too. Garrett reached down, ran his hand along the dog's neck. The animal exhaled softly, warm breath clouding in the cold. That was when he heard the engine. Not the rough growl of a truck navigating rural roads, but something smoother, polished. A black sedan crested the hill at the end of the gravel drive, tires crunching through packed snow with careful precision. The vehicle stopped 20 feet from the cabin engine, idling. Garrett straightened, shovel still in hand. Few people came this far out. Fewer still drove cars that expensive. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out, tall and composed, moving with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. She was in her late 60s, silver hair pulled into a low knot, wearing a charcoal wool coat that spoke of city tailors and careful maintenance. Her face was lined, but strong eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried a leather briefcase, held it close to her body as she approached. Maverick's ears snapped forward. The dog didn't bark. Instead, he moved past Garrett, stopped at the edge of the porch, and did something Garrett hadn't seen in 3 years. The retriever lowered his head, pointed his nose directly at the briefcase, and held perfectly still. It was a trained behavior, one Garrett recognized from his own service. Detection work. The kind of instinct that didn't just appear. The woman noticed. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. She stopped walking, studied the dog with the kind of careful attention most people reserved for things they didn't understand. Garrett's pulse kicked up a notch. He set the shovel against the railing, moved to stand beside Maverick. His voice came out low, controlled. "What brings you out here?" The woman's gaze shifted from the dog to his face. She assessed him the way he'd been assessed 1,000 times before. Former military, she'd recognized the posture, the readiness in his stance, even when he was trying to appear casual. Her expression softened just slightly. "My name is Theodora Whitmore. People call me Thea. I'm an attorney. I represent the estate of Thomas Whitmore." The name landed like a stone in still water. Thomas Whitmore. 3 years ago, late season thaw, ice on the lake too thin to hold weight. Garrett had been out walking, trying to clear his head after another hospital visit, when he'd heard the crack and the shout. He'd run toward the sound, found an old man thrashing in frigid water, going under. No thought, just action. He'd crawled across weakening ice, extended a fallen branch, pulled the man out. They'd sat together on the shore afterward, both shaking from cold and adrenaline. The old man had gripped his forearm with surprising strength, looked him in the eye, and said something Garrett hadn't understood at the time. "You didn't ask my name. I won't forget that." Garrett's throat tightened. Thomas Whitmore, the man who'd sent a card after his wife died, handwritten simple condolences that felt genuine in a way most sympathy gestures didn't. The man who'd called twice, asked how he was doing, never pushed for more than Garrett wanted to give. He passed away 6 days ago. Thea's voice was gentle but direct, peaceful in his sleep. He was 76. She paused, adjusted her grip on the briefcase. You are named in his will. The words didn't process immediately. Garrett stared at her, then at Maverick, who still held his point position toward the briefcase, as if whatever was inside mattered more than anything happening around them. Inside the cabin, he could see Lily's silhouette shift closer to the window. I pulled him out of the ice. That's all. We barely knew each other. Thea's expression suggested she'd expected this response. Mr. Whitmore was very intentional about his decisions. The reading of the will is scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon at the Whitmore Lodge about 15 miles north of here. She reached into her coat pocket, withdrew a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark wax, handed it to him. Whether you come or not, something was left in your name. Her fingers were steady as she released the envelope into his hand, the wax seal pressed against his palm still slightly warm despite the cold. Maverick finally broke position, circled back to Garrett's side, leaned against his knee with deliberate weight. What did he leave? The question came out rougher than intended. Thea's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's what the reading will reveal. But I can tell you this. Mr. Whitmore spoke of you often in his final months. He believed you were the kind of man who stays. She returned to her car before he could respond, drove away with the same careful precision she'd arrived with. The sedan disappeared down the road, leaving only tire tracks in fresh snow and 1,000 questions Garrett didn't know how to answer. Inside the cabin, Lily had moved to the door. She opened it, cold air rushing in, and looked up at her father with eyes that held too much understanding for 8 years old. Who was that? Someone who knew Thomas Whitmore. The man I pulled from the lake. Is he dead? Yes. Lily processed this with the quiet acceptance of a child who'd already learned about loss. Are we going? Garrett looked at the envelope in his hand, felt the weight of it like something alive. He thought about medical bills, about the eviction notice he'd received last week because he was 2 months behind on rent, about the phone calls from collection agencies he'd stopped answering. He thought about Lily's face when she came home from school yesterday, quiet in a way that meant something had happened she didn't want to talk about. Yeah, we're going. The drive to Whitmore Lodge took them through country roads lined with pine trees heavy under snow. Lily sat in the passenger seat, backpack on her lap, humming quietly to herself. Maverick stretched across the back seat, head resting on crossed paws, amber eyes watching the passing landscape with calm attention. Garrett's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles white against weathered leather. The lodge appeared where the trees thinned and the lake widened, a 2-story structure of weathered timber and white-trimmed windows that looked like it had grown from the land rather than been built on it. A faded sign near the road read, Whitmore Lodge, in hand-painted letters, the kind of work someone had done with pride and a steady wrist decades ago. Snow lay in soft drifts along the porch steps. 2 other vehicles were already parked in the lot, a silver BMW and a black Range Rover, both spotless despite the winter roads. Garrett cut the engine. The silence felt too heavy. Lily unbuckled her seatbelt, pressed her face against the window. It's pretty, like a gingerbread house. He looked at her, this small person who'd become his entire world, and felt the familiar ache of wanting to give her more than he had, more than clearance rack winter coats and generic cereal, and a father who couldn't seem to find his footing in civilian life. Let's see what this is about. Inside, warmth hit them first. Wood stove heat, old pine boards, the faint scent of coffee, and something sweet like cinnamon, trapped in the grain of the walls. The main room opened before them, large windows facing the frozen lake, leather furniture arranged around a stone fireplace where flames crackled with genuine warmth. A handful of chairs had been set up near a small table where papers were stacked in neat folders. Thea stood by the fireplace, now wearing reading glasses, reviewing documents with the focused attention of someone who took her work seriously. 3 other people occupied the room, positioned together like a matched set. Expensive clothes, practiced postures, the kind of casual wealth that came from never having to think about money. They turned when Garrett and Lily entered, and something shifted in the air. A calculation, a dismissal, a judgment rendered before introductions were made. The first man looked to be in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered and tall, with hair swept back in a style that probably required product and regular salon visits. He wore a camel coat over a cashmere sweater boots that had never seen real work. His eyes moved over Garrett with the speed of someone assessing value and finding it lacking. This had to be Blaine Whitmore. Beside him stood a larger man, older by a couple years, built like someone who'd once been athletic and now used size for intimidation rather than sport. Close-cropped hair, heavy brow stubble that looked more like neglect than style. His hands were large knuckles thick, and he kept flexing them against his thighs as if his body couldn't stand stillness. Colton Whitmore, probably, the enforcer. The woman sat with legs crossed and posture perfect, as if she'd learned early that elegance could be weaponized. Early 30s, slender dark hair falling straight to her shoulders, makeup subtle and expensive. Her gray eyes tracked Garrett's entrance with cool assessment, lingered briefly on Lily, then dismissed them both with the efficiency of someone sorting mail. Sloane Whitmore. Thea cleared her throat, a sound that cut through the tension with quiet authority. "Thank you all for coming. We'll begin now." No one argued. Garrett guided Lily to a chair at the back, felt her small hand slip into his for just a moment before she settled with her backpack on her lap. Maverick lay at her feet, positioned between her and the strangers with deliberate placement. Thea opened the folder, the paper inside thick and official. Her reading voice was steady, professional, the kind developed over decades of delivering news both good and difficult. The will was straightforward in its opening: certain personal effects to charities, a portion set aside for lodge maintenance staff who'd remained through difficult years, small bequests to local organizations Thomas had supported. Blaine checked his phone. A quick glance he thought was subtle. It wasn't. Thea's eyes lifted just slightly, a correction delivered without words. He pocketed the device. Then she reached the section everyone had been waiting for. Regarding the Whitmore Lodge property, including the main building, the adjacent workshop, and the 3-acre plot along the northern lakeshore, these are bequeathed in full to Garrett Stone. The room didn't erupt. It paused first, like a record needle catching in a groove. Blaine's expression shifted from polite attention to confusion to something harder. Colton's jaw tightened, muscles bunching beneath skin. Sloane's lips parted slightly, not quite disbelief, but close. Garrett felt nothing. Not triumph, not confusion, not even relief. Just the strange discomfort of being handed something he hadn't asked for, didn't understand, and wasn't sure he wanted. Thea placed a ring of keys on the table. Old keys, heavy with use metal, worn smooth where fingers had turned them for years. Then she set down something else. A silver coin, larger than modern currency, bright but not shiny, the kind of silver that carried age in its dull edges. It made a soft sound when it touched the wood. "Mr." Whitmore left a note. Thea unfolded a small card, her voice softening with something close to emotion. "If you stay, this place won't die." Blaine let out a laugh. One sharp bark, as if the sentence itself were an insult. "You're joking. This can't be serious. That lodge bleeds money. The property taxes alone?" Colton didn't laugh. His voice came out rough, dangerous. "A lodge. A workshop. Some random guy gets the property and we get what? The burden of being related to him?" Sloane leaned forward, eyes bright with calculation beneath a veneer of politeness. "And a coin. How charming. Like a fairy tale." Garrett didn't reach for the keys or the coin. He stared at them as if they were equipment he hadn't been trained to use. Beside him, Lily had gone very still, the kind of stillness children develop when adults are angry and they don't understand why. Maverick moved. Not aggressively, not defensively, just shifted position until he was sitting directly in front of the table, nose inches from the silver coin. He didn't whine or fidget. He simply watched it with a focus that made the hair on Garrett's arms rise beneath his worn jacket. Blaine's tone shifted into something like mock generosity. "Listen, this doesn't have to be complicated. We were already planning to sell. A developer wants the shoreline for vacation rentals, a small resort. Real money. He spread his hands as if offering a gift. We'll handle the paperwork. You sign over your share, walk away with something substantial. Colton nodded, eyes narrowing. Yeah. 50,000. Clean, simple. Don't get in our way. Sloane's smile carried no warmth. Honestly, it's the kindest thing we can do. This place is quaint, but quaint doesn't pay property taxes or repair costs. Thea looked at them with an expression that bordered on pity. This is what Mr. Whitmore wanted. It is legally binding and not subject to negotiation today. Colton's chair scraped against the floor as he stood halfway, anger pulling him up like a string. Legally binding. To give a stranger the entire property. Who even is he to? Thomas Garrett finally lifted his gaze from the coin. I pulled him out of the ice 3 years ago, that's all. The room went still again. Blaine's practiced smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, then returned brighter, more condescending. Oh, so this is guilt. Gratitude. Some old man's dramatic gesture. Garrett's jaw tightened, not because of Blaine, but because the word dramatic made Thomas sound like a joke. Like the man who'd gripped his arm on the shore shaking from cold, and something deeper hadn't been utterly serious in every word he'd spoken. Thea's voice cut through without rising in volume. Mr. Stone is not required to justify his relationship with Mr. Whitmore. We are here to execute the will as written. Sloane's eyes moved deliberately over Garrett's appearance. Faded tactical jacket worn at the cuffs and shoulders. Work boots scarred by actual labor. Jeans that had been washed too many times. Her expression turned faintly amused, almost pitying. So what are you going to do? Run a charity cabin? Serve hot chocolate to retirees? The instinct rose in Garrett to disappear, to leave, to let louder people fight among themselves while he slipped out the back. That instinct had served him in combat, in hospitals, in funeral homes. It didn't serve him here. Not with Lily watching her backpack clutched tight against her chest, waiting to see what her father would do. He reached out and picked up the keys. The weight surprised him, heavier than expected, as if each key carried stories he hadn't earned the right to hear. Then he took the silver coin between his fingers. Cold, solid, real. He turned it, felt the ridges along the edge, and there it was, tiny engraving, precise and deliberate. North Star. 2 words that tightened his throat for reasons he couldn't name. Something about them felt like direction and promise tangled together, like someone had left him coordinates to something he hadn't known he was looking for. Maverick stepped closer, placed one paw gently on Garrett's boot. Not a demand, not a request, just an anchoring touch. Soft, but deliberate. The dog's amber eyes fixed not on Blaine or Colton or Sloane, but on Garrett, asking a question without sound. Are you leaving this to them, or are you staying? In that quiet gaze was something older than the room, like the kind of truth people used to swear by when they believed words mattered. Garrett realized with sudden clarity that the lodge wasn't a prize. It was a test. Not of intelligence or strength, but of something quieter, more difficult to measure. The moment passed. Maverick lowered his paw, calm again, but the imprint remained like warmth on skin after someone lets go. Garrett turned back to the 3 people who looked at him like an obstacle to be removed. I'm not selling. Blaine laughed again, but now it had an edge. You don't even know what you're refusing. We're talking about real money, enough to solve whatever problems brought you to a rental cabin in the middle of nowhere. I know what I'm refusing. Colton stood fully now, anger rising like heat from pavement. You think you can just move and play caretaker? His eyes cut to Maverick. Hide behind a dog and some dead man's sentimental garbage. Maverick's ears lifted. Not aggressive, attentive, the kind of attention that made people rethink their next step. Thea closed the folder with a soft final sound. This concludes the reading. Mr. Stone, I'll need your signature on the transfer documents. Blaine leaned forward, smile gone, voice dropping to something real for the first time. This isn't over. Sloane stood smoothing her coat like nothing had happened, but her eyes stayed sharp. You'll get tired. Everyone does. She paused at the door, looked back at Lily for just a moment. Especially with a child to think about. Colton muttered something under his breath that sounded like both threat and promise wrapped in profanity. They left in a rush of expensive fabric and cold air, the door closing behind them with a thud that echoed through the lodge. Silence returned, broken only by the fire crackling in the hearth. Thea handed Garrett a pen. He signed where she indicated handwriting clean and practiced the kind that came from filling out forms in places where mistakes cost lives. When it was done, Thea slid the keys toward him again as if returning something that had always been his. "Mr. Whitmore believed you were the kind of man who stays." Garrett didn't answer. The compliment made him uncomfortable. Praise always had. He looked around the sitting room. The furniture was worn, patched in places. The windows were old but clean. A faint draft curled along the floorboards. Lily hadn't moved from her chair. She sat very still, backpack on her lap, watching her father with an expression he couldn't quite read. Maverick walked past Garrett into the main lobby where ceilings rose higher and light from front windows poured in like pale gold. The dog paused, turned in a slow circle, sniffing the air. Then he lay down in the middle of the lobby, exactly where a welcome mat used to be, front legs stretched forward, head lifted, body relaxed, but present, like a guard, like a promise. Garrett watched him for a long moment. In the dog's stillness, the lodge felt less empty, less like a burden and more like something waiting to be understood. Thea gathered her papers, movements neat and quiet. "I'll be available if you need anything." She paused at the door, glanced back. Thomas knew what he was doing, even at the end. Then she was gone, and Garrett stood alone with his daughter and a dog and a building he didn't know how to keep from dying. Lily finally spoke, her voice small but clear. "Dad, are we going to live here?" He looked at her, this 8-year-old child who'd watched her mother waste away, who'd packed and unpacked their belongings 6 times in 2 years as they'd moved from place to place, chasing cheaper rent, who'd learned not to ask for things because she'd seen the look on his face when he couldn't provide them. "I don't know yet. We'll figure it out." She nodded, accepting this non-answer the way she'd learned to accept most things. "Can I look around?" "Stay where I can see you." She slipped from the chair, backpack still on her shoulders, and moved through the sitting room with careful steps. Maverick lifted his head, watched her pass, then settled again. Garrett remained standing between the 2 rooms, keys heavy in his hand, silver coin cold against his palm. The lodge was quiet in a different way than his cabin. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something holding its breath. Waiting. He walked slowly through the main floor, boots echoing against hardwood. The dining area held solid pine tables scarred by years of use. He ran his hand across one surface, felt grooves where plates had been set down. Glasses had left rings, elbows had rested during long conversations. Photographs lined the walls. Fishermen grinning beside the lake, families in flannel holding mugs bigger than children's hands. Groups of men in varying ages with the particular look of people who'd seen things they didn't talk about. Veterans. The realization settled like weight. This place had been built for them. In the kitchen, copper pans hung from hooks, a faded recipe card pinned to a corkboard, cinnamon bread handwritten in careful script. He left it there. The thermostat near the hallway showed 58 degrees. He adjusted it upward. Pipes groaned softly as heat began to move through them. Lily's voice drifted from somewhere upstairs. "Dad, there are rooms up here, like a hotel." He climbed the stairs, found her standing in a hallway with 6 doors all closed. She'd opened one, a small bedroom with a narrow bed and a quilt folded neatly at the foot. Simple, clean, waiting. "Can this be my room?" Her voice carried something he hadn't heard in months. Hope. Small and cautious, but present. "We're not staying yet. We're just looking. But we could stay. Right? The property is yours now." He didn't know how to explain that ownership without money was just a different kind of burden, that the property taxes Blaine had mentioned were probably real, that keeping a building like this running through a Minnesota winter cost more than he had, that accepting this gift felt like accepting responsibility he wasn't equipped to handle. But he looked at his daughter, backpack still on her shoulders like she was ready to run at any moment, and thought about the cabin they rented where the heat barely worked, and the walls were so thin he could hear her crying at night when she thought he was asleep. Maybe. We'll see. She smiled. Just a small curve of her lips, but it was real, and it made his chest ache. They explored together, found the workshop behind the main building, tools organized on pegboards, sawdust still on the floor, projects half finished on workbenches. Found a storage room with linens and dishes stacked in careful order. Found Thomas's study on the second-floor door slightly ajar. Garrett pushed it open slowly. The room smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper. A desk sat near the window, papers stacked in neat piles. A bookshelf lined one wall, spines cracked from use. And on the far wall, something that stopped him completely. A large corkboard covered in photographs. Not random snapshots, but organized displays. Men in uniform, men in civilian clothes, men alone in pairs in groups. Some photos were recent, others yellowed with age. And in the center, larger than the rest, a photograph of two men in Navy SEAL gear, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the particular exhaustion of people who'd just survived something together. Garrett recognized one of them. Thomas Whitmore, decades younger, face unlined but eyes already carrying weight. The other man took his breath away. His father, James Stone. Dead 15 years, killed in action in a place Garrett had never been allowed to know about, in circumstances his mother had never fully explained. The father he barely remembered except in fragments, a laugh, a rough hand ruffling his hair, a voice reading stories before bed. His father standing beside Thomas Whitmore like brothers. Lily appeared at his elbow, looked up at the photograph. "Who's that?" The words stuck in his throat. It took 3 tries to get them out. "My dad. Your grandfather." She studied the picture with serious attention. "He looks like you." Garrett's vision blurred. He turned away, crossed to the desk, needed something to do with his hands. He opened a drawer at random. Inside, a stack of letters tied with string. He lifted them carefully, saw his father's handwriting on the first envelope, addressed to Thomas. His hands shook. He set them down, closed the drawer. Not yet. He wasn't ready for whatever those letters contained. Maverick appeared in the doorway, ears forward, expression alert. The dog crossed the room, placed his nose against a different drawer. He didn't scratch or whine, just stood there insistent. Garrett knelt, opened it. Inside, a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, and a small wooden box. He lifted the journal first. The first page was dated 15 years ago. Thomas's handwriting neat and deliberate. James brought his boy to the lodge today. 6 years old already, watching everything, taking it in. Smart kid. Quiet. I promised James if anything happened I'd keep an eye on the family. Didn't think I'd ever have to keep that promise. Garrett's throat closed completely. He flipped forward. Entries scattered over years chronicling a man's decision to watch from a distance, to wait to be ready if needed. Saw Garrett at the grocery store today. He's grown. Military bearing already, even at 17. He doesn't know I'm watching. That's how James wanted it. No pressure, no obligation. Just someone making sure the path stays clear if he needs it. Further ahead. Garrett got married today. Didn't go to the wedding, wouldn't be appropriate. But I saw the announcement in the paper. Pretty girl. Teacher. James would be proud. And then heard about the diagnosis. Cancer. Stage 4. I wanted to reach out, but what would I say? I'm just an old man he pulled from the ice. But I've been setting things in order. Making sure. If something happens to me, he'll have a place. Not money. Money doesn't fix this kind of hurt. But a place. That's what this lodge did for me after we lost James. It can do the same for his son. Garrett's breath came ragged. Tears fell before he could stop them, hot against cold cheeks. Lily moved closer, wrapped her arms around his waist, held him with surprising strength for someone so small. "It's okay, Dad." Her voice carried the same tone she'd used when her mother died, trying to comfort him even though she was the child. "It's okay to be sad." He put the journal down, pulled her close, let himself break in a way he hadn't since the funeral. Maverick pressed against both of them, warm and solid and steady. When he could breathe again, when his vision cleared, he opened the wooden box. Inside, a folded note on top of tissue paper. He lifted it with shaking hands. "Garrett, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Good. I was tired. Your father was my brother in every way that mattered. When I lost him, this lodge saved my life. Literally. I was ready to quit, and this place gave me purpose. I spent 15 years watching you from a distance, keeping the promise I made to James. You don't owe me anything, but I'm betting you need this place as much as it needs you. The coin will make sense when you're ready. Stay strong. Thomas." Beneath the note, wrapped carefully in tissue, was a folded American flag, the kind given to families at military funerals. Garrett lifted it, felt the weight of fabric and meaning. A small tag attached to the corner, James Stone, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. His father's flag. The one his mother had been given. The one that had disappeared from their house years ago, along with other memories his mother had packed away because looking at them hurt too much. Thomas had kept it safe, had waited, had known someday Garrett would need it. He held the flag against his chest, felt Lily's arms tighten around him, felt Maverick's steady warmth against his leg, and understood for the first time that he hadn't just inherited property. He'd inherited a promise kept across 15 years, a belief that he would eventually find his way to this moment. Downstairs, the lodge settled around them. Pipes hummed, floors creaked. The building wasn't just wood and nails and memories, it was proof that someone had cared enough to wait. That night they stayed. Garrett found blankets in the storage room, built a fire in the main hearth, made sandwiches from supplies in his truck. They ate sitting on the floor in front of the flames. Maverick stretched between them, the lodge dark except for firelight dancing across old photographs on the walls. Lily fell asleep against his shoulder. He carried her upstairs to the room she'd chosen, tucked her in under quilts that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. She didn't wake. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, this small person who was his entire reason for everything. Downstairs again, Maverick at his heels, he walked to the front windows. Outside, snow had begun falling again, soft flakes catching light from the porch. The lake stretched away into darkness, ice and snow and winter that would last months yet. He pulled the silver coin from his pocket, held it up to the firelight. North Star. On the reverse side, he found what he'd missed before, tiny coordinates engraved so small he'd needed the right angle of light to see them. He pulled out his phone, entered them into GPS. A location 4 miles into the woods. Nothing marked on maps, just coordinates and a promise that if he followed them, he'd find something. Garrett closed his fist around the coin. Tomorrow he'd worry about property taxes and heating bills and whether 3 people with money and lawyers could undo what Thomas had done. Tonight, he'd sleep in a building his father had known, protected by a promise 15 years old, holding tight to the first thing in 2 years that felt like it might possibly be hope. Maverick lay down in front of the door, head on paws, amber eyes reflecting firelight. The dog's steady breathing matched the rhythm of the lodge settling into sleep. Outside, snow continued falling, covering tracks, smoothing edges, making the world clean again. Inside, warmth held. And Garrett Stone, who'd spent years learning how to survive but had forgotten how to live, closed his eyes and let exhausted sleep take him. Tomorrow would bring questions he couldn't answer. But tonight, for the first time since he'd watched his wife stop breathing, he wasn't running from grief. He was standing still. And maybe that was enough. The morning came with gray light and bitter cold. Garrett woke stiff on the couch where he'd collapsed, blanket tangled around his legs, every muscle protesting. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then memory returned, the reading, the keys, his father's photograph, Thomas's letter. The lodge. Maverick stood by the door waiting patiently. Garrett rose, let the dog out. Watched him explore the snow-covered yard with methodical attention. Steam rose from the dog's breath in the frigid air. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, hair tangled, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "Morning, Dad. Morning, sweetheart. How'd you sleep?" "Good. Really good." She descended carefully, hand on the railing. It was quiet. No sirens or cars or anything. The observation landed with unexpected weight. She was right. The cabin they rented sat near enough to the highway that traffic noise never stopped. Here, silence wrapped around them like something physical. He made coffee with grounds he found in the kitchen, surprisingly fresh, made toast from bread that was only slightly stale. They ate standing at the counter, looking out at the frozen lake through windows that needed washing but still held the view. A knock at the door pulled his attention. Maverick barked once, low and alert. Garrett crossed the room, hand instinctively checking for a sidearm that wasn't there anymore, habit from years of different kinds of doors. He opened it to find an elderly woman standing on the porch, both hands wrapped around a casserole dish, steam curling from beneath its foil cover. She was small, maybe 5'2", with silver hair catching morning light, and eyes a pale blue that held both warmth and assessment. "Figured you'd forget to eat proper." Her voice carried the particular cadence of someone who'd lived in Minnesota her whole life. "I'm Iris Hartley, lived 3 houses down for 40 years. Garrett stepped aside. "Come in, please." Iris entered with the careful steps of someone who'd learned to navigate ice and uneven ground through decades of practice. She set the casserole on the kitchen counter, unwrapped it to reveal what looked like chicken and vegetables in a cream sauce. Still hot. "Heard about Thomas." Her eyes drifted past Garrett into the main room, studying everything with quiet reverence. "Feels different already, like someone's breathing life back into it." Lily appeared from where she'd been exploring the dining area, drawn by the smell of real food. "Hi." Iris's expression softened completely. "Well, hello there, sweetheart. What's your name, Lily? That's a beautiful name. Your daddy's lucky to have you." Something about the simple statement, the casual acknowledgement that he was a father trying his best, made Garrett's throat tight. He busied himself finding plates, serving portions of the casserole that tasted like comfort and care mixed together. They ate standing, Iris talking easily about the lodge's history, about Thomas's kindness, about winters that had been harder and easier but always beautiful in their way. She asked nothing intrusive, demanded no explanations, simply offered presence and food and the kind of acceptance that couldn't be faked. When she left, she squeezed Garrett's arm gently. "You're going to be good for this place. I can tell." The rest of the morning brought more visitors. A tall man arrived around 11, so thin he seemed assembled from wire and determination. Walter Brennan, early 80s, wearing a thick brown cardigan buttoned unevenly and boots that hadn't been tied properly. His eyes were pale blue and uncertain, flickering as though searching for something that kept slipping away. "Is Thomas here?" Walter stepped inside without waiting for invitation, looking around with confused hope. Garrett felt the weight of the answer. "No, sir. He's not." Walter blinked, confusion clouding his features. He looked around the room again, brow furrowed. "Oh, right. He drifted toward the fireplace, lowered himself into an armchair as if muscle memory guided him. Maverick approached, gently lay beside the chair, close enough that Walter's hand could rest absent-mindedly on the dog's back. It did, and for a moment the old man's gaze sharpened. "You're a good one." Garrett watched this exchange carefully. Memory came and went like northern light, but touch stayed. Connection remained even when names and faces blurred. Walter stayed for an hour, mostly quiet, occasionally asking questions that circled back to Thomas, to years past, to things that might or might not have happened. Garrett answered gently, never correcting, just acknowledging. When Walter finally rose to leave, he paused at the door, looked directly at Garrett with sudden clarity. "Don't let them take it. He wants you to stay." Then the fog returned and Walter wandered out into the snow, heading toward a house visible through the trees. By afternoon, one more visitor arrived. A pickup truck, old but well-maintained, pulled into the lot. A man climbed out, moving with the particular stiffness of old injuries in colder weather. 73, maybe, built like someone who'd once been solid steel and now bore dents from decades of living. Short gray hair, rough salt and pepper beard, dark observant eyes that missed nothing. Dutch Morrison. He didn't offer a handshake, just a nod. "Heard you're the new keeper." Garrett met his gaze evenly. "Something like that." Dutch studied him with the frankness of someone who'd stopped caring about polite pretense years ago. "You plan on running it like a business?" "No." Dutch's expression didn't change, but something eased in his shoulders. Good. He sat down near the window, facing the lake, uninvited but somehow appropriate. Place wasn't built for profit, built for purpose. They sat in silence for a while, Dutch watching the ice, Garrett pretending to review papers Thea had left. Lily colored at one of the dining tables, Maverick stretched at her feet. Eventually Dutch spoke again. "Your dad and Thomas saved my life in 2009. Different kind of mission than most people know about." He paused, worked his jaw. "I came back wrong. Couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing things. Thomas brought me here, gave me work to do, didn't ask questions. Took 6 months before I could string 2 days together without wanting to eat my gun." Garrett looked up from the papers he wasn't really reading. Dutch met his eyes. "This place matters. Don't let those vultures convince you otherwise." "How many people did Thomas help?" Dutch considered. "That I know about 20-30. That I don't know about, probably double that." The numbers settled like stones. This wasn't just a building, it was a lifeline stretched across years. That evening, Thea returned. She found Garrett on the porch watching sunset color the snow in shades of gold and pink. Lily was inside doing homework at the dining table, Maverick keeping watch. "How was your first day as a property owner?" Thea's voice carried gentle amusement. "Confusing." "That's accurate." She handed him a folder. "Property information, tax records, utility accounts. The reality you'll need to face." He opened it, scanned numbers that made his stomach sink. Property taxes, $18,000 annually. Heating costs that varied but averaged $1,200 monthly in winter. Insurance. Maintenance. The list went on. "I don't have this kind of money." Thomas knew that. Thea's expression remained calm. "He also knew you'd figure it out if you decided to stay." "What if I can't?" "Then you'll make that choice when the time comes. But today isn't that day." She left him with the folder and too many thoughts. Inside, Lily had fallen asleep at the table, head pillowed on her folded arms, colored pencils scattered around her. Garrett lifted her carefully, carried her upstairs, tucked her in again. Downstairs, he built up the fire, sat with the folder, forced himself to read every page. The numbers were brutal. Even with the will settled, he had maybe 6 months before financial reality crushed whatever dream Thomas had left him, unless he sold. Blaine's offer of $50,000 would clear his debts, give him breathing room, let him and Lily start somewhere else with a clean slate. But he thought about Walter's hand on Maverick's fur, about Iris bringing food, about Dutch's quiet confession, about his father's photograph on the wall upstairs, about Thomas's note, "If you stay, this place won't die." Maverick padded over, lay at his feet with a heavy sigh. Garrett reached down, ran his hand along the dog's neck, felt steady warmth beneath thick fur. "I don't know how to do this." The words came out quiet confession to a dog who couldn't answer but somehow understood anyway. Outside, temperature dropped as night deepened. Inside, the fire held, and Garrett sat with papers and decisions and the growing realization that staying might cost him everything he didn't have, but leaving would cost something he couldn't name and didn't want to lose. The third week brought rain that turned snow to slush and exposed the lodge's weaknesses. Water dripped through the roof in 3 places. The furnace coughed and wheezed before dying completely at 2 in the morning. Garrett woke to Lily's teeth chattering, found her buried under every blanket she could find, breath visible in the dark. He spent the next morning on the phone with repair companies, each one quoting numbers that made his jaw clench. $4,000 for the roof, $2,500 for furnace replacement. Parts alone would eat through what little savings he had left. The collection agency called twice while he was pricing materials. He didn't answer. Dutch showed up before noon, truck bed loaded with tools and lumber. "Heard your furnace quit." His tone suggested this wasn't a question. "How'd you hear that small town?" "People notice when smoke stops coming from chimneys." Dutch climbed out, started unloading without asking permission. "We'll fix it ourselves. I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." Dutch handed him a wrench. "Your dad knew his way around engines. Figure his son might have inherited something useful." They worked through the afternoon, Dutch's hands moving with practiced efficiency despite arthritis that made his knuckles swell. He talked while they worked stories about James Stone that Garrett had never heard. Your old man could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. Taught half the guys in his unit basic mechanics. Saved our asses more than once when equipment failed in places we weren't supposed to be. Garrett listened, absorbing details that felt like recovering stolen property. His mother had packed away most memories of his father, unable to look at them without breaking. This second-hand knowledge was all he had. By sunset, they'd coaxed the furnace back to life. Not a permanent fix, but enough to keep the lodge warm through winter. Dutch refused dinner, just nodded and drove away as the sky darkened. That evening, Thea arrived with groceries she claimed were extra from her shop. The bags held everything Garrett needed and couldn't afford fresh vegetables, decent meat bread that wasn't day-old. She moved through the kitchen with easy familiarity, showing Lily how to measure flour, how to knead dough with just enough pressure. Thomas used to say this place saved 23 men. Thea's voice stayed matter-of-fact while her hands worked. 23 that he knew about for certain. Probably more he never counted. Veterans who came here broken, left able to face another day. The number echoed what Dutch had mentioned. Garrett watched Thea shape dough, wondered what kind of man spent decades catching people before they fell. Week 4 brought repairs that couldn't wait. The roof demanded attention before spring rains made it worse. Garrett climbed up with borrowed materials, worked in freezing wind that cut through layers. His hands cramped, his shoulders burned, but the work felt clean, honest, something he could control when everything else spun beyond his grasp. Lily started walking to the small school 3 miles down the road. The first day she came home quiet, wouldn't talk about it. The second day she smiled, mentioned a girl named Emma who shared her lunch. By the end of the week she was helping Thea in the kitchen after school, learning recipes, laughing at stories about Thomas burning cookies so badly the smoke alarm became a timer. Dutch appeared most afternoons teaching Garrett carpentry through demonstration and terse instruction. How to read grain in wood, how to join boards so they'd hold for decades, how to build things that lasted. You've got your dad's hands, natural feel for tools. Dutch sanded a piece of trim with long, even strokes. He built half the furniture in this place during his recovery. That desk upstairs. The bookshelves. All James. Garrett hadn't known. Each discovery felt like finding fragments of a person he'd barely known, piecing together a father from other people's memories. The 5th week arrived with unexpected violence. Not weather, but human wreckage in the form of a rusted sedan that pulled into the lot after dark. Garrett heard it from inside, the engine knocking badly, headlights swinging wild across windows. 3 people climbed out. A man mid-30s moving with the unsteady determination of someone very drunk. 2 boys, one tall and angry, one small and scared. The man stumbled, caught himself against the car, looked toward the lit windows like a drowning person spotting shore. Garrett stepped onto the porch. Maverick moved with him, alert but not aggressive. The man's voice came thick, slurred. "Thomas Whitmore. Need to see him. Please." Mr. Whitmore passed away. "This is private property." The taller boy, 16, maybe, spat into the snow. Great. Another dead end. His anger had sharp edges, the kind that came from disappointment applied repeatedly until it hardened into permanent armor. The smaller boy, no more than 10, stayed pressed against the car. His eyes were too wide, face pale in the porch light. The man swayed, gripped the car for balance. "I'm Wade Turner," Thomas said. "If I needed help, he'd be here." His voice cracked. "I got nowhere else." Garrett recognized the desperation. He'd heard it in his own voice during his wife's final weeks, calling hospitals at 3 in the morning, begging for options that didn't exist. He saw himself in Wade's shaking hands, in the boys' frightened faces. "You're drunk." Wade's chin lifted with defiant shame. "Yeah, I am. Been sober 90 days before tonight. 90 whole days." His laugh was bitter. "Lost my job yesterday. Landlord's kicking us out. So I bought a bottle and here we are." The older boy, Callan Garrett would learn later, clenched his fists. "We should go. This is pathetic." But the younger one, Finn, looked at the lodge like it was the last warm place in a world made of ice. Garrett should have sent them away. Should have called the sheriff, let professionals handle this mess. Instead, he heard himself speaking. You can stay tonight, sleep it off. But if you're on my property, you don't drink. Wade blinked, uncomprehending. I'll give you work. Repairs, maintenance, whatever needs doing. You stay sober, you help out. You've got a place here until you figure out next steps. You drink again, you leave. Those are the terms. Callan's expression twisted between hope and practiced cynicism. Why would you do that? Because someone did it for me once. The words came out before Garrett fully understood them, but they were true. Thomas had offered him this place. Dutch had shown up with tools. Iris brought food. Thea taught his daughter to bake. The lodge didn't run on money. It ran on people deciding to show up. Wade's eyes filled. He wiped at them roughly. I can't pay you. I'm not asking you to. Garrett's voice stayed firm. But you work, and you stay sober. That's the deal. They unloaded 3 garbage bags of belongings. Garrett gave them rooms upstairs, found spare bedding, made sandwiches nobody ate. Wade passed out fully clothed. The boys sat in their shared room door, cracked, whispering to each other in voices that carried more fear than words. Lily watched all this from the hallway, her expression serious. Are they staying? For now? That's good. Her certainty surprised him. They need somewhere safe. Week 6 brought the kind of storm that made the first one seem gentle. The sky turned gray-black by noon. Wind arrived first, testing windows and doors, finding every gap in the lodge's defenses. Then snow came horizontal, turning the world into a white roar that swallowed everything beyond 20 feet. Garrett had learned. He checked the generator-filled fuel tanks, brought extra wood inside. He called Thea, told her to spread the word. Anyone who needed shelter, the lodge was open. They came before visibility dropped to nothing. Iris arrived with Walter. The old man confused about why they were leaving his house. Dutch showed up with a woman Garrett hadn't met, Sheriff Nora Callahan, 42, practical with eyes that assessed situations before speaking. Roads are closing fast. Her voice carried authority without arrogance. We'll have people stranded. Can you take them? Yes. By 6 o'clock, the lodge held 12 people. Grace Morgan, 74. A widow who lived alone and refused to be a burden until Dutch physically escorted her from her house. Father Michael, 65, who'd been checking on parishioners when the storm caught him. 2 families with small children, their heat out, and no way to fix it in the blizzard. The main room became organized chaos. Thea and Iris took over the kitchen, directing Lily and the other children in meal preparation. The smells of stew and fresh bread filled the air, warring with wood smoke and wet wool. Walter sat by the fire, sometimes present, sometimes lost in memories that flickered across his face like shadows. Wade worked quietly, hauling wood, checking on people, his hands shaking but his resolve visible. Callan helped reluctantly, anger still a shield he carried everywhere. Finn attached himself to Lily, the 2 younger kids finding comfort in each other's presence. Dutch and Garrett moved through the lodge, checking windows, securing doors, making sure everyone had blankets. The work felt familiar. Tactical planning, resource management, keeping people alive. Different context, same principles. Nora pulled Garrett aside near midnight. You're good at this. At what? Creating order from chaos. She gestured at the main room where people had settled into sleep, children curled against parents, elderly folks wrapped in quilts, Wade watching over his sons with exhausted vigilance. Most people panic. You organize. Military training, can't shut it off, don't try. Her eyes held respect. This town needs someone like you. The storm raged for 36 hours. Power died across the county. The generator held, keeping the lodge warm and lit while the world outside became an undifferentiated white scream. People cooked together, ate together, told stories to keep children calm. Thea taught 3 different women her bread recipe. Iris showed Lily how to patch quilts. Father Michael led prayers that felt more like meditation than religion. On the second night, tension cracked. Callan had been building toward explosion since he arrived. Anger compressed until it needed release. Something small triggered it. Finn accidentally knocked over Callan's backpack, spilling contents across the floor. The older boy erupted. "You ruin everything!" His voice carried pain disguised as rage. "Can't do anything right, can you?" Finn's face crumpled. "I didn't mean to. You never mean to. But it always happens. We're here because of you." Callan's hands shook. "Dad started drinking again because you got sick and insurance wouldn't cover it," and Wade moved toward his son. "Callan, that's not... Don't!" Callan shoved past his father, grabbed his coat, headed for the door. Garrett caught his arm. "You can't go out there. Watch me." Callan wrenched free, slammed outside into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow. Visibility was maybe 5 feet. Snow cut at exposed skin. Callan was gone before Garrett could react. Maverick didn't hesitate. The dog bolted into the white, powerful legs, driving through drifts, nose working, despite conditions that should have made scent tracking impossible. Garrett followed, shouting Callan's name into wind that shredded words before they traveled 10 feet. He found Maverick 30 yards from the lodge, stationary in deep snow, focused on something beneath a pine. Garrett stumbled forward, dropped to his knees, started digging. Callan lay curled against the tree trunk, already shivering violently, lips, blue eyes unfocused. Hypothermia worked fast in these conditions. Garrett stripped off his own coat, wrapped it around the boy, lifted him. Callan was all angles and bones and frozen limbs. The walk back felt longer than it had been. Garrett couldn't see the lodge, navigated by faith and Maverick's instinct. His arms burned, his lungs screamed. Callan's shivering weakened, which was worse than the shaking. The lodge appeared like salvation, warm light bleeding through the storm. Hands reached out, pulled them inside. Thea and Nora moved with practiced efficiency, stripping Callan's wet clothes, wrapping him in blankets, positioning him near the fire without burning him. Wade dropped beside his son, tears streaming. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. All of it." Callan's teeth chattered too hard for speech, but his eyes found his father's face, held there with something that might have been forgiveness or just exhaustion. Garrett sat on the floor, soaked and shaking, while Iris forced hot coffee into his hands. Lily pressed against his side, small and warm and alive. "That was stupid." Nora's voice held no judgment, just observation. "Yeah, you could have died. The boy would have died for certain." She nodded, accepting the logic. "You're going to fit in here just fine." By morning the storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of new snow. The county plow wouldn't reach them for days. Nobody seemed to mind. The lodge had become its own ecosystem, people helping each other simply because that's what you did when you were trapped together. Callan recovered, chastened and quiet. Wade stopped shaking. Finn smiled for the first time since arriving. And Garrett, who'd spent 2 years believing he had nothing left to offer the world, discovered that keeping people warm and fed and safe was its own kind of purpose. Week 8 arrived with problems that couldn't be solved through carpentry. A registered letter came from a law firm in the city, thick envelope with expensive letterhead. Garrett opened it, standing in the kitchen while Lily did homework at the table. The language was dense, deliberately complex, but the meaning became clear. Blaine Whitmore had filed a formal challenge to the will. The basis: Thomas had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's 2 years before his death. His mental competency when drafting the will was therefore questionable. The document requested immediate suspension of asset transfer pending psychiatric review and court evaluation. Attached was a letter from a developer. $400,000 for the property contingent on the Whitmore heirs gaining full ownership. The offer was valid for 60 days. Garrett's hands clenched around the paper. 30 days ago, he might have welcomed this, seen it as escape from impossible responsibility. Now it felt like theft of something that didn't belong to him, but had been entrusted to his care. A second envelope came the same day. Tax notice. $18,000 due in 30 days. Failure to pay would result in foreclosure proceedings. He had $3,000 in his account. The repairs had eaten everything else. That night he couldn't sleep. Numbers churned through his head, every calculation ending the same way. He was $15,000 short with no way to earn it before the deadline. The lodge couldn't generate income. He had no assets to sell except the property itself, which was exactly what Blaine wanted. Wade found him at 3 in the morning, sitting in the study with papers spread across Thomas's desk. The other man had been sober 12 days, working hard, keeping his head down. "You okay?" Wade's voice carried the cautious concern of someone who knew what spiraling thoughts looked like. "Just math problems. Bad ones. The kind that don't have solutions." Garrett gestured at the papers. "Property taxes I can't pay. Legal challenge I can't fight. Developer offer that would solve everything if I gave up." Wade sat down slowly. "What does giving up look like?" "Selling the lodge. Taking the money. Starting over somewhere else. And the people who need this place." The question sat heavy between them. Garrett thought about Walter, who came here 3 times a week because familiar rooms helped him remember who he was. About Iris, who cooked in this kitchen because it connected her to friends she'd lost. About Dutch, who'd found reasons to live within these walls. About Wade and his sons currently sleeping upstairs because someone had offered them exactly the kind of grace Thomas had offered others for decades. Giving up looks like 23 men who didn't kill themselves, except now, maybe they do. Wade nodded slowly. "Then you can't give up." "I don't have $15,000. Yet." Wade's smile was thin but real. "You didn't have a working furnace either. But you figured it out." The 9th week brought small actions that added up. Dutch quietly mentioned the tax situation to people he trusted. Word spread the way it does in communities that remember how to care for their own. Within 3 days, Iris organized a bake sale at the church. Thea donated half her shop's profits for a week. Father Michael passed a special collection plate. The fundraising felt simultaneously humbling and insufficient. Each dollar mattered, each gesture carried weight, but the total climbed too slowly. By week 12, they'd raised $5,000, still 13 short with time running out. Garrett spent those weeks maintaining the lodge, helping Wade stay sober through moments when the craving made his hands shake, watching Lily thrive in ways she hadn't since her mother died. The child had color in her cheeks now, friends who came over to study confidence that came from being part of something larger than survival. One morning he remembered the coin. He'd carried it since the reading, sometimes pulling it out to study the engraving. North Star on one side, coordinates on the other. He'd been too busy to follow them, too overwhelmed to pursue mysteries when survival demanded immediate attention. But now, with the deadline looming and options exhausted, curiosity pulled at him. What had Thomas wanted him to find? He told Wade he'd be gone for a few hours left. Lily with Thea took Maverick and followed the GPS coordinates into the woods. The snow had melted enough to make hiking possible, though difficult. 4 miles through pine forest, crossing frozen streams, navigating terrain that showed no signs of human passage. The cabin appeared where trees thickened almost invisible until you were right on it. Small structure, weathered logs, roof sagging but intact. The door opened with a push. Inside smelled of old wood and mice. A single room empty except for a cot, a small table, and a military-grade storage trunk pushed against the far wall. The trunk was locked but not secured. The padlock hung open, waiting. Garrett lifted the lid. The hinges protested, but moved. Inside, organized with military precision, a radio decades old, but probably still functional. Maps of the region with hand-marked locations, a thick journal bound in leather, and beneath everything wrapped in waterproof material, neat stacks of currency. He lifted the journal first. Thomas's handwriting entries spanning years. The opening page dated back to when Garrett's father was still alive. "James and I built this place. Somewhere quiet off-grid in case things went wrong and we needed extraction space for people the system failed. Never thought I'd need it alone." Garrett flipped forward, reading entries that chronicled Thomas's private war against veteran suicide. Names of men he'd helped, dates they'd arrived, broken notes on their progress. Small victories celebrated in sparse prose. Setbacks recorded with clinical honesty. Near the end, an entry from 6 months before Thomas died. His handwriting shook, but remained legible. Alzheimer's confirmed. Early stage, but it's there. I can feel it sometimes, words slipping away, memories getting tangled. I need to set things in order before I lose the ability to make choices. The will is done. Thea knows what to do. The money is here for emergencies, for whoever stays, for the lodge. Garrett set the journal down, lifted the wrapped bundle. Inside, counted carefully and labeled with dates, was $20,000 in cash. Money accumulated over years, small amounts added regularly. The VA pension Thomas had lived on saved instead of spent. A note rested on top of the bills. For emergencies, for the lodge, for whoever has the courage to stay when staying is hardest. Use it well. Trust yourself. Thomas. Garrett's hands shook. Here was the solution, unexpected and complete. $18,000 for taxes, $2,000 left for immediate repairs. The lodge could survive another season. But something deeper than relief moved through him. Thomas had left this here coordinates hidden on a coin, trusting that whoever found it would have proven themselves worthy through the search itself. Not a handout, a reward for commitment. He packed the money, carefully secured the journal, locked the trunk. The walk back felt different, lighter, like he'd been carrying weight he could finally set down. That evening he told no one except Thea, who smiled with knowing eyes. He knew you'd find it when the time was right. But the relief lasted exactly one day. Week 13 brought catastrophe in small boy size. Finn Turner, who'd been quiet and careful since arriving, collapsed during recess at school. The nurse called Wade, who called Garrett, who drove them both to the hospital in the city. Appendicitis. Emergency surgery required. Insurance, which Wade barely had, wouldn't cover the procedure. The financial counselor quoted $8,000 minimum cash up front or approved credit. Wade sat in the waiting room, head in his hands, shaking. I can't. I don't have it. I can't lose him. Garrett thought about the money hidden in his truck. Thought about tax deadlines and legal challenges and everything that number represented. Thought about what Thomas would do, what his father might have done, what kind of man he wanted to be when his own daughter looked at him. He paid the $8,000 in cash, watched Wade break down in gratitude, sat with him through surgery, through recovery, through the terrifying hours when a child's life hung uncertain. Finn survived. The surgery went well. By evening he was awake, groggy but stable, asking for his brother with a voice that barely worked. Garrett drove back to the lodge at midnight, $12,000 remaining, still $6,000 short of what he needed. The deadline was 2 weeks away. He'd made his choice. He didn't regret it. But the arithmetic was brutally clear. He was going to lose the lodge. Week 14 brought the community's response. When Thea learned what Garrett had done, Wade couldn't keep quiet. The story spilled out through tears and gratitude. She made 3 phone calls. Within hours, Dutch showed up with an envelope containing $2,000, his entire Social Security check for the month. Iris brought $700, everything she'd saved from her part-time work at the library. Father Michael arrived with another $1,000 from the church emergency fund. Nora contributed $500 from her sheriff's salary. Other people Garrett barely knew brought 20s and hundreds amounts they couldn't really spare but chose to give anyway. By the end of the week, they'd raised $4,800. Combined with what he had left, he was still $1,200 short. So close, impossibly close. But close didn't pay tax bills. Garrett sat in the study doing math he'd done 100 times, hoping the numbers would change through repetition. They didn't. Blaine called that evening. His voice carried barely concealed triumph. Time's running out. You've got 5 days until tax foreclosure. The offer stands: sell to us. Get the money to solve your problems. Everyone wins. Everyone except the people who need this place. Sentiment doesn't keep the lights on. Think about your daughter. You really want her to watch you lose everything because you're too stubborn to accept help. This isn't help. This is theft dressed in expensive words. Suit yourself. Blaine's voice hardened. But when you're packing your things next week, remember, you had a choice. Garrett hung up, stared at papers that might as well have been written in a language he didn't speak. Maverick pressed against his leg, warm weight without answers. Lily appeared in the doorway, homework abandoned. Dad, are we going to lose the lodge? He couldn't lie to her. She'd learned too young that adults couldn't fix everything. Maybe, sweetheart. Because of Finn? Because you paid for his surgery? No. I'd make that choice again. She crossed the room, climbed into his lap, despite being almost too big for it. Good. Mom would have done the same thing. Her voice carried absolute certainty. Helping people is more important than keeping stuff. Her simple moral clarity cut through complexity like light through fog. She was right. Of course she was right. But right didn't change the deadline or produce money that didn't exist. Week 15 brought Blaine to the lodge in person. He arrived with Colton and Sloan, all three dressed like they were attending a business meeting rather than visiting property they'd never valued. They found Garrett on the porch splitting wood, working through frustration with physical labor. Final offer. Blaine's tone suggested generosity he didn't feel. $100,000. More than fair for property this size in this condition. Sign today, money in your account tomorrow, all legal problems disappear. No. Colton stepped forward, using size for intimidation. You're being stupid. It's just a building. Garrett set the axe down carefully, turned to face them. It's not a building. It's 23 men who didn't kill themselves because someone gave them a place to heal. It's Walter remembering who he is 3 days a week. It's Wade 90 days sober with somewhere safe for his kids. It's my daughter laughing for the first time since her mother died. That's not just a building. Sloane's expression flickered, something that might have been recognition or regret moving behind her eyes before professional coldness returned. You can't save everyone. No. But I can keep the door open for whoever needs it. That's what Thomas did. That's what I'm going to do. Blaine's practiced patience finally cracked. With what money? You're $6,000 short and out of time. This is pride talking, not sense. Your stubbornness doesn't make you noble. It makes you foolish. Maybe. Garrett picked the axe back up. But I'd rather be foolish with an open door than practical with a locked one. They left angry tires spraying gravel, expensive vehicles disappearing down the road. Garrett split wood until his shoulders burned and his hands cramped, and the pile grew tall enough to last through spring. That evening Thea arrived with papers and an expression he couldn't read. Serious, but not grim. Purposeful. We need to talk. She gestured toward the study. Privately. They sat across from each other at Thomas's desk. Thea arranged documents with the precision of someone who'd done this before, who knew exactly what needed to be said and how to say it. I need to tell you something Thomas made me promise to keep secret until now. Her voice carried weight. I've been executor of his estate for 5 years. He knew the Alzheimer's was coming. He planned for it meticulously. The legal challenge is meaningless. All his documents were prepared and notarized 2 years before symptoms became noticeable. The diagnosis he got afterward doesn't invalidate decisions made while he was demonstrably competent. Garrett felt relief and confusion warring. Then why didn't you? Because Thomas didn't want you to have it easy. Thea's smile was soft, almost apologetic. He set conditions, specific ones. If you sold the property within 90 days of inheriting, everything would go to his blood relatives. You'd get nothing. But I've been here longer than 90 days. 126 days, actually. Thea pulled out another document. He also required you to help 3 people find healing. Demonstrable help, not just charity. You had to prove the lodge could still serve its purpose. Walter, Wade, Callan, the names came out certain. Exactly. Which means legally you have full ownership. No contest possible. The will is ironclad. The tax deadline. Thea's expression shifted to something close to amusement. Thomas paid property taxes 3 years in advance before he died. There is no tax due. The notice was a test, to see if you'd panic and sell or fight to stay. The world tilted sideways. Garrett gripped the desk edge, needing something solid. This was all a test, not a test. Approving. Thomas needed to know the lodge would go to someone who'd stay when staying was hardest, who'd sacrifice their own comfort for others, who'd choose people over profit. Her eyes held warmth. You passed, every part of it. Relief crashed through him so hard he couldn't speak. No taxes, no legal threat. The lodge was his, clear and complete, without conditions or countdown clocks. Then why he had to stop, breathe, start again. Why, let me go through all this because knowing something is safe and fighting to keep it safe create different kinds of commitment. Thea's voice gentled. You could have sold a dozen times. You chose to stay. Now you know why you stayed. That matters. Outside snow had started falling again, gentle flakes catching porch light. Inside the lodge settled around them with the particular sounds of a place that knew it would survive. Garrett thought about Thomas's journal about his father's hands building furniture that still held weight, about 23 men who'd found reasons to live within these walls. About Lily upstairs doing homework, Wade watching his sons sleep, Dutch teaching carpentry, Iris bringing food, Thea showing up with exactly what was needed, exactly when it mattered most. The lodge had never been his to save. He'd been the one who needed saving. Thomas had known that. Had built a test disguised as inheritance, a challenge wrapped in generosity, a proving ground for a man who'd forgotten how to believe in anything beyond survival. Maverick padded into the room, lay at Garrett's feet with a contented sigh. The dog's amber eyes reflected firelight and something deeper satisfaction maybe, or recognition that the long watch was over. This place doesn't just save people. Garrett's voice came out rough. It shows them who they could be. That's what Thomas believed. Thea gathered her papers. That's what your father believed when he helped build it. That's what you're proving true by staying. She left him with documents that meant freedom and responsibility tangled together in equal measure. Garrett sat in the study until midnight, holding his father's flag, reading Thomas's journal, trying to understand the gift he'd been given. Not property, purpose, not inheritance, identity. Outside the North Star hung bright above frozen lake and sleeping forest. Inside warmth held. And Garrett Stone, who'd spent 2 years running from grief only to discover he'd been running toward home, finally understood what the coin had always meant. Not a direction, a destination, the place where lost things found their way back. Spring arrived the way it always did in northern Minnesota, reluctantly arguing with winter over every degree. Week 19 brought temperatures that climbed above freezing during daylight, though nights still dipped low enough to form ice on puddles. The lake began its annual transformation, white surface darkening to gray hairline cracks, spreading like veins beneath skin. Garrett stood on the dock behind the lodge, watching fractures multiply. Maverick sat beside him, winter coat shedding in uneven patches, leaving tufts of undercoat that caught on everything. The dog's amber eyes tracked movement on the ice, subtle shifts invisible to human sight, but clear to senses, honed through centuries of breeding. Behind them, the lodge hummed with activity. Wade had been sober 87 days, counting each one like currency earned through blood and sweat. He worked maintenance now, not as charity but as employment, Garrett paying him from the small income generated by renting out 2 rooms to hunters passing through. The money was barely enough, but Wade treated every dollar like proof he could still contribute something of value. His sons had changed too. Callan's anger had softened into something closer to wary hope. He helped Dutch in the workshop most afternoons, learning to shape wood with tools instead of fists. Finn followed Lily everywhere, the 2 children inventing games that involved elaborate rules only they understood. The legal papers sat in Thomas's study, filed and final. Blaine had received notification 3 days ago. His response came via certified letter, 2 sentences of bureaucratic rage disguised as professional acknowledgement. Colton hadn't bothered responding, but Sloane had called. Her voice carried exhaustion more than anger. My grandfather was a better judge of character than I gave him credit for. A pause, breath drawn like preparation for difficult words. I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you do right by that place. Garrett had accepted the apology without ceremony, recognized it as real, and let it stand without requiring more. Grudges were weights he didn't need to carry. Now, watching ice crack beneath spring sun, he felt the particular satisfaction of having survived winter. Not just weather, but the season of testing that had stripped away everything except what mattered. The lodge stood solid behind him, repairs holding furnace working roof, patched well enough to last another year before needing proper replacement. Dutch emerged from the workshop, hands dusted with sawdust, carrying something wrapped in cloth. He approached with his usual economy of movement, no wasted steps. Finished it. Dutch unwrapped the cloth, revealed a wooden sign carved with careful precision. The letters read, North Star Veterans Lodge, Community Welcome. Below, in smaller script, founded 1962, renewed 2024. Garrett ran his fingers over the carving, felt the grain Thomas's hands might have touched decades ago. Where do you want it, main entrance? Where people see it first. Dutch's expression remained neutral, but satisfaction lived in the sit of his shoulders. Your dad would have approved. He understood the importance of clear signals. They mounted it together that afternoon, securing bolts through pre-drilled holes, making sure it hung level and true. Lily came out to watch Finn trailing behind her, both children solemn as if witnessing something sacred. What does renewed mean? Finn's voice carried genuine curiosity, not challenge. It means something old gets a second chance. Garrett tightened the last bolt, stepped back to examine their work. Means it's not over just because it stopped for a while, like Dad. Finn's observation landed with unexpected weight. He stopped being good, but now he's good again. Yeah, exactly like that. That evening, Father Michael arrived for dinner, bringing wine he'd blessed, though nobody asked him to. The priest had become a regular presence, showing up to help with repairs, to sit with Walter, when dementia made the old man frightened, to simply be present without requiring anyone to perform faith for his benefit. Over Thea's pot roast, she'd claimed the kitchen 2 nights a week, teaching Lily recipes that came with stories attached. Conversation turned to plans. Garrett had been thinking about Thomas's journals, about the 23 men mentioned, about how the lodge had functioned before Thomas's health failed. I want to start a veterans group. The words came out more certain than he felt. Weekly meetings, safe space to talk, no mandated therapy, no official programs, just men who understand each other. Father Michael nodded slowly. How many do you think would come? Dutch answered before Garrett could. I know 8 who'd show up. More once word spreads that it's legitimate. What makes it legitimate, Wade's question, wasn't skeptical, just practical. That we've all earned the right to be there. Dutch's voice carried finality. No civilians trying to fix us, no doctors taking notes, just us. The first meeting happened 3 weeks later on a Tuesday evening, when rain drummed against windows and the lodge smelled of coffee and wood smoke. 8 men arrived separately, parking trucks at careful distances, approaching the door with the particular wariness of people who'd learned to assess threats before entering buildings. Garrett recognized the body language. He'd worn it himself for months after discharge, that constant low-grade readiness that never quite shut off. He met each man at the door, shook hands, offered coffee, asked nothing. They assembled in the main room, chairs arranged in a loose circle near the fireplace. No hierarchy, no obvious leader, just men ranging from mid-20s to late 60s, all carrying something invisible and heavy. Dutch spoke first, voice rough but steady. Most of you know me. Some of you know why I'm here. For those who don't, I came back from Afghanistan in 2009, ready to eat my gun. Thomas Whitmore gave me a reason not to. He paused, worked his jaw. This place saved my life. Figure maybe it could help others too. Silence followed, not awkward, but weighted. Then a younger man spoke up, couldn't have been more than 27, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. Iraq, 2019. IED took 3 of my guys. I was driving. His hands clenched. Been telling myself I'm fine for 5 years. Not sure that's true anymore. Another voice, older, steadier. Vietnam. PTSD wasn't even a term back then. We just called it being unable to hack civilian life. Lost 2 marriages because of it. The stories came slowly at first, then faster, each man's words giving permission for the next. Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, places they couldn't name, doing things they couldn't discuss. Different wars, same wounds. Garrett listened, heard his own experiences reflected in different accents, different details, same fundamental truth. When his turn came, the words stuck. He'd never spoken about it, not even to therapists the VA assigned. But something about this room, these men, the lodge holding them like cupped hands, made silence feel like cowardice. My last mission. He had to stop, breathe, start again. We went in to extract a unit that got pinned down. Intelligence was bad. We walked into an ambush. Lost 3 men before we pulled back. He could see their faces, hear their voices, feel the weight of dog tags he'd collected from bodies. I got out. They didn't. And I've been trying to figure out how to live with that ever since. The room held him in understanding that didn't require words. These men knew. They'd all carried bodies, made impossible choices, survived when others didn't. The younger veteran spoke quietly. "Your wife, I heard she passed. Cancer. 18 months of treatment. Nothing worked." Garrett's throat tightened. "I fought harder to save her than I ever fought in combat." "Lost anyway." Dutch's voice came low. "That's why we're here. To remember we're not the only ones losing fights we can't win." The meeting lasted 2 hours. No solutions emerged, no breakthroughs happened, no one left fixed. But something shifted. Isolation cracked just slightly enough to let light through. When men finally stood to leave, handshakes carried weight, eye contact held meaning. The younger veteran paused at the door. This helped. His voice barely carried. "I'll come back. Door's always open." Over the following months, attendance grew. 10 men became 12, then 15. Wade joined after hitting 90 days sober, his presence reminder that different battles required equal courage. They met every Tuesday, rain or shine, talking or sitting in silence depending on what the room needed. Garrett discovered something unexpected: helping others heal, created space for his own healing. Speaking about his wife, about the men he'd lost, about the guilt that lived in his chest like shrapnel, made the weight bearable. Not lighter, but distributed across shoulders strong enough to carry shared burdens. One evening in May, Lily asked to attend. She was 9 now, taller voice, stronger, carrying herself with confidence that came from being surrounded by people who valued her presence. "Why do you want to come?" Garrett kept his tone neutral, not discouraging, but needing to understand. "Because Mom died and you were sad, and now you're less sad." Her logic was child-simple and devastating. "I think the sad men should know it gets better." He brought her the next Tuesday. She sat quietly while men talked, didn't interrupt, just listened with the particular attention children bring to adult pain. When the meeting ended, she approached the young veteran who'd spoken first that initial night. "I wrote something about my mom. Want to hear it?" The man nodded clearly, uncertain but unwilling to refuse a child. Lily pulled a folded paper from her pocket, read in a clear voice. "My mom had yellow hair, and she laughed a lot until she got sick. Then she was tired all the time, but she still read me stories. When she died, I was really sad, and Dad was really sad, and I thought we'd always be sad. But Dad started helping people, and the sad got smaller. It's still there, but it doesn't fill up everything anymore. I think that's okay. I think Mom would think it's okay too." Silence filled the room, the kind that comes when truth lands too hard for immediate response. The veteran's eyes filled. He wiped at them roughly, nodded. "Yeah. Your mom would definitely think it's okay." That night, Garrett tucked Lily into bed, smoothed hair back from her forehead in a gesture his own mother had used. "You did good tonight." The sad men seemed less sad after. Her observation was simple, accurate. Does helping people make the hurt stop? No. But it makes the hurt mean something. He kissed her forehead. "That's different than it stopping, but it's important." Spring deepened into early summer. The ice on the lake finished its annual disappearance, water appearing beneath where white had been for months. Garrett stood on the dock one morning watching a small rowboat drift free from winter moorings pulled by current toward the far shore. The boat had been frozen in place so long he'd forgotten it existed as something capable of movement. Now it floated unanchored but not lost, finding its own path across open water. Thea appeared beside him, moving quietly for someone her age. "Beautiful, isn't it? The thaw. Everything frozen, finding movement again." He understood she wasn't just talking about boats. "Yeah, it is." She handed him an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with wax, that matched the one from Thomas's will. "He kept this for you. Asked me to give it when I thought you were ready." His hands shook slightly, taking it. "When did you decide I was ready?" "About 3 weeks ago. when you laughed at something Dutch said. Real laughter, not the kind you perform. Her eyes held warmth. Thomas wanted you to have this when you remembered how. Garrett waited until evening to open it. Lily, asleep upstairs. Lodge quiet except for settling sounds and Maverick's breathing where the dog lay by the fire. The wax seal broke cleanly, revealing pages covered in Thomas's careful script. Garrett, if you're reading this, Thea judged you ready. Trust her judgment. She's been my conscience for 40 years. I never had children. Your father was my brother in every way that mattered except blood. When he died, I promised to watch over you. Couldn't be there when you were young, wouldn't have been appropriate, and your mother had her own grief to manage. But I could be there now through this place. The North Star guides home. You guided me home from that ice. This is my way of guiding you. Not to a place, to a purpose. Your father saved 12 men in combat. You can save 120 here. Different battles. Same war. The war against despair, against isolation, against the lie that strength means suffering alone. This lodge was built on a simple truth. Broken things can be made whole if someone cares enough to hold them together while they heal. You've been broken. You know what it costs. You know what it takes. Use that knowledge. Build something that lasts longer than either of us. The coin's coordinates led you to money. But the real inheritance isn't cash. It's the understanding that we don't save people by fixing them. We save them by staying when they're unfixable, by keeping doors open when everyone else locks theirs, by believing in second chances even when first chances failed spectacularly. Your daughter is watching. She's learning from you what strength looks like. Show her it looks like showing up, like keeping promises, like building places where broken people can become whole. I'm proud of you. Your father would be too. Stay strong, son. You're already home. Thomas Garrett read the letter 3 times each pass, finding new weight in familiar words. When he finally set it down, his vision blurred with tears that fell without shame. Maverick moved closer, pressed warm weight against his leg. Outside, stars emerged as darkness deepened. The North Star hung bright above the tree line, constant, while everything else wheeled and changed. Inside, the lodge held steady rooms that had witnessed decades of healing, ready to witness decades more. 6 months after inheriting, Garrett stood in the main room assessing transformation. The lodge wasn't pristine, couldn't be, not with daily use by people who needed it more than they needed perfection. But it was alive, functional, purposeful. Wade's family had moved into the cabin where Thomas kept emergency supplies. The structure needed work, but Wade tackled repairs with the focused energy of someone rebuilding more than walls. Callan attended community college studying engineering. Finn thrived in school, his earlier fearfulness replaced by the confident curiosity of a child who knew home was stable. Walter came 3 times weekly, some days sharp, and present, others lost in fog. But surrounded by familiar faces and patient acceptance, his fear diminished. He helped in the kitchen when memory allowed, sat by the fire when it didn't, always welcomed. Dutch ran woodworking classes Saturday mornings, teaching veterans skills that turned trauma-sharpened focus into creative production. The workshop filled with projects, furniture carvings, repairs that men approached with the seriousness of important work. Iris and Thea maintained their cooking rotation, involving Lily and other children in meal preparation that doubled as community building. Food appeared when needed, not as charity, but as the natural result of people caring for each other. The veterans group had grown to 18 regular attendees. New men arrived cautiously, invited by members who recognized similar pain in strangers' eyes. The circle expanded to accommodate them, conversations deepening as trust built through repetition. Father Michael led no formal services, but maintained quiet presence available for those who sought spiritual guidance without forcing faith on those who'd lost it. His acceptance of doubt as legitimate response to trauma made him safe for men suspicious of religious platitudes. Nora stopped by weekly, checking on people the way good sheriffs do in small communities, not investigating, just maintaining connection. She brought information about resources, helped navigate bureaucracy that intimidated men more comfortable with clear chains of command than civilian chaos. The lodge had become what Thomas envisioned, not a business, not a charity, but a living organism sustained by mutual care. Money remained tight. Garrett took carpentry jobs in town, paid essential bills, patched and improvised and made do. Abundance wasn't the point. Survival with dignity was. One Thursday evening in late June, headlights swept across windows as dusk deepened. Garrett looked up from ledgers that needed balancing, saw an unfamiliar truck pull into the lot. A man climbed out slowly, favoring his left leg, moving with the careful deliberation of someone managing chronic pain. He stood in the lot for a long moment, staring at the lodge like it might disappear if he blinked. Finally, he approached the door, knocked with the uncertain rhythm of someone unsure of welcome. Garrett opened it. The man was maybe 40, weathered beyond his years, eyes carrying particular haunted quality Garrett recognized immediately. Combat veteran, recent enough to still bleed from invisible wounds. "Is this?" The man's voice caught, started again. "Is this the place for veterans?" "Yeah, come in." The man stepped across the threshold, tension visible in shoulders hunched against expected rejection. "I heard about it from a guy at the VA. Said you might. That maybe." He couldn't finish sentences, thoughts fragmenting under weight of whatever brought him here. "You need somewhere to stay. Just for tonight. Maybe. I've been." The man swallowed hard. "I've been thinking about things I shouldn't think about. Figured maybe I needed to be somewhere I couldn't act on them." Recognition hit like physical impact. Garrett knew that particular desperation, had heard it in voices of men who attended meetings, had felt echoes of it in his own darkest moments. This man was holding on by threads, looking for someone to grab the other end before they snapped. "You're safe here." Garrett's voice stayed calm, anchoring. "Got a room ready. Hot food in the kitchen. People who understand. No judgment." The man's eyes filled. "I don't have money. Didn't ask for money. Asked if you needed help." "Different question." Lily appeared from the kitchen, hands dusted with flour, Finn trailing behind her. They looked at the stranger with the open curiosity of children who'd learned that newcomers often needed gentleness. "Hi. We're making cookies. Want some?" Lily's offer was simple, innocent, exactly what the moment needed. The man nodded, unable to speak. Garrett guided him to a chair, got coffee. Let silence do the work, words couldn't. Maverick approached, lay at the man's feet, offered presence without demand. Over the next hour, fragments emerged. Afghanistan, 2021, final withdrawal. Things witnessed that couldn't be forgotten. Loss of brothers, loss of purpose, loss of belief, that life after service held meaning. The man's words came in broken pieces, but the story was whole. He'd reached the edge where continuing felt harder than stopping. "You planning to stay past tonight?" Garrett kept his tone neutral, making the offer but not pressuring. "Don't know. Maybe. If that's okay." "It's okay. Stay as long as you need." The man stayed 3 days, then a week, then asked if he could stay longer. Garrett put him to work on repairs, gave him purpose through contribution. The change wasn't dramatic or fast, but slowly, through routine and acceptance and the particular understanding of men who'd walked similar paths, something shifted. Hope didn't return suddenly. It accumulated in small deposits, conversations that didn't hurt, sleep that came without nightmares, mornings that felt possible. By month 7, the lodge housed 4 men in various stages of recovery. The rooms Thomas had kept ready found purpose again. The building, designed to save lives, resumed its original function, each person who stayed becoming proof that the mission continued. August brought thunderstorms that rolled across the lake with impressive fury. Garrett stood on the porch one evening, watching lightning illuminate clouds in brief flashes, feeling thunder resonate through his chest. Lily joined him, slipping her hand into his, no longer small but not yet grown. "Do you miss Mom?" Her question came without warning, delivered in the same tone she might ask about weather. "Every day. Me too." She leaned against him, warmth and solidity and life continuing. "But I think she'd like what we're doing, helping people, making the lodge important again." "I think so too." They stood together while the storm played out its drama above them, rain falling in sheets that turned the world liquid and temporary. Inside, lights glowed warm. Men gathered around the dining table, talking or not talking, simply present together. Maverick lay by the fire, gray around his muzzle now, but eyes still bright. The storm passed as storms do, leaving air clean and earth soaked. Stars emerged slowly one at a time until the sky held more light than darkness. The North Star appeared in its permanent position, steady, while everything else moved. One late September evening, as leaves began turning and air carried the first hints of coming winter, new headlights swept across the lodge. Garrett was in the workshop with Dutch learning techniques for joining wood that would hold for generations. They looked up together, saw a sedan pull in slowly, hesitant. A couple climbed out young, maybe late 20s. The woman was visibly pregnant, maybe 7 months. The man held her elbow with protective care, both of them scanning the building with expressions mixing hope and uncertainty. Garrett approached, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Can I help you?" The man spoke hesitantly. "We're lost. GPS died about an hour ago, and we've been driving trying to find the main highway. The woman's exhausted, and I was wondering." He gestured at the lodge. "Is this a hotel or something? Could we maybe rest for a bit?" "Not a hotel. But you're welcome to come in. Rest. We've got food if you're hungry." The woman's eyes filled with relief so profound it spoke to exhaustion beyond physical. "Thank you. I'm sorry to impose, we just—" She touched her stomach. "Baby's been kicking all day and I'm so tired." "No imposition. Come on." Garrett led them inside where warmth and light and the smell of dinner greeted them. Lily appeared from the kitchen, saw the pregnant woman, immediately offered a chair near the fire. "You should sit. Being pregnant is hard work. My mom told me that before she got sick." The woman sank into the offered chair with visible gratitude. "Thank you, sweetheart." Over the next hour, Garrett learned they were driving from Chicago to visit family in Duluth. Wrong turn then, another, then the kind of disorientation that happens when technology fails and darkness falls. They'd been lost for 3 hours, increasingly desperate when they saw the lodge lights. Thea arrived with food, as she often did around dinner time, took one look at the exhausted couple, and immediately began organizing meal service. Dutch excused himself, but not before shaking the man's hand with the particular gravitas he reserved for people he respected without knowing why yet. Wade brought blankets. Walter offered the woman his chair, which was closer to the fire. The Afghan veteran who'd arrived in June emerged from upstairs, assessed the situation quietly, made sure both visitors had coffee and water within reach. The couple watched this orchestrated care with growing wonder. The woman's hand rested on her stomach, expression softening from stress into something approaching peace. "What is this place?" Her question carried genuine curiosity. "A lodge." Garrett settled into a chair nearby Maverick at his feet. "Used to be a veterans support center. Still is in ways. Now it's just—" He paused, searching for accurate words. "A place where people help each other. Where doors stay open." The man looked around at the photographs on the walls, at the men gathered in quiet conversation, at the children doing homework at the dining table. "This is special. You can feel it. My father helped build it. Man named Thomas Whitmore kept it running for decades. He left it to me. Now I'm trying to keep it running for whoever needs it." Why? The woman's question wasn't challenging, just seeking understanding. Because strength isn't about standing alone. It's about keeping the door open so nobody has to. The words surprised him as he spoke them. Truth crystallized through months of learning and unlearning. He'd spent years after service believing independence defined strength, that asking for help meant weakness, that real men carried burdens without complaint. The lodge had taught him different. Strength was the door that opened, the hand that reached out, the space held ready for whoever needed shelter from storms both literal and internal. The couple stayed until morning, sleeping in guest rooms kept ready for exactly this purpose. Over breakfast, the man tried to pay. Garrett refused. Instead, he gave them clear directions to Duluth, sent them off with baked goods. Lily and Thea had made the night before, watched them drive away with the particular satisfaction of having extended grace without requiring anything in return. "That's 24. Dutch's voice came from behind him. 24 people the lodge has saved or helped since Thomas died, one more than his count. Garrett turned. Found the older man leaning against the porch railing, morning light catching silver in his beard. "You keeping track?" "Someone should." Dutch's expression held quiet pride. "Your father would have made it to 50. You'll beat that easy." Different battles. Same war. The phrase from Thomas's letter had become something close to a mantra. October brought the first serious cold temperatures, dropping fast enough to remind everyone winter was coming. Garrett spent weekends winterizing, checking insulation, sealing gaps, making sure the furnace would handle the load. Wade worked beside him, competent and steady, 90 days sober, becoming 120, then 150, each milestone marked privately but significantly. The veterans group grew to 23 members, the number taking on symbolic weight. Nobody mentioned, but everyone recognized. They met every Tuesday, sharing space and silence, words and understanding. Garrett's own healing continued through facilitation, each story heard, making his own grief more bearable. One November evening, as early snow began falling in the particular way that promised accumulation, Garrett sat in Thomas's study reviewing accounts. Money was tight but manageable. Donations had started arriving, small amounts from people who'd heard about the lodge veterans who'd been helped, sending $20 or $50 with notes of gratitude. Not enough to make him comfortable, but enough to keep going. Lily entered when he called. She was growing fast, losing baby. Roundness, becoming someone who'd carry her mother's kindness and her father's quiet strength. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think Mom knows about the lodge and everything we're doing?" He set the pen down, gave her his full attention. "I don't know what happens after people die, nobody does for certain. But I think—" He had to pause, find words that honored both honesty and hope. "I think if love survives death, then yeah, she knows. And she's proud." Lily nodded, accepting this answer the way she'd learned to accept uncertainty without losing faith. "That's what I think too." She crossed to the window, looked out at falling snow. "This is home now, right? We're staying." "Yeah, we're staying." The certainty in his voice surprised him. 6 months ago, staying had felt like choice made from lack of options. Now it felt like choice made from abundance, not of money, but of purpose and connection, and the particular wealth that comes from being exactly where you're meant to be. Winter arrived with the inevitability of seasons, but this year Garrett was ready. The lodge stood prepared, rooms, warm pantry, stocked generators serviced and tested. When the first major storm hit in early December, he simply opened the doors and waited. They came as they always did when weather turned dangerous. Iris and Walter Thea bringing supplies. Dutch checking on everyone. Father Michael ensuring isolated parishioners had shelter. The veterans group arrived one by one, helping each other, bringing those who couldn't drive themselves. But this time, something was different. This time, Garrett wasn't fighting to save something that might slip away. He was maintaining something that had proven its right to exist. The lodge had moved beyond survival into sustainable existence, not through wealth but through community commitment to its continuation. That evening, with snow falling heavy outside and warmth holding steady inside, Garrett stood by the fireplace watching people settle into familiar rhythms. Thea and Iris cooking together, teaching children who'd eventually teach others. Dutch showing a new veteran how to use hand tools. Patience infinite, because someone had shown him the same patience years before. Wade supervising his son's homework, present and sober, and building the kind of memories that might heal damage caused by earlier absence. Maverick lay in the center of the room, old now, but still watchful, still ready if needed. The dog's breathing was steady, content, a sound that had become the lodge's heartbeat. Lily appeared at Garrett's elbow, looked up at him with eyes too knowing for 9 years old. "We did it. We kept it alive." "Yeah, we did." He pulled her close, felt her warmth against his side. "We're still doing it." On the mantel above the fireplace, positioned where everyone could see it, sat the silver coin Thomas had left. North Star engraved on one side, coordinates on the other. Beside it, framed now, the letter from Thomas, Above that, photographs his father and Thomas in Navy gear, arms around each other's shoulders. Current pictures of the veterans group of community dinners of children learning to bake in the kitchen where bread had been made for decades. The lodge had become what Thomas envisioned, and what Garrett's father helped build, not a monument to past sacrifice, but a living space where present struggle found support, where broken people discovered they could become whole, not through fixing, but through being held steady while they healed themselves. Outside, the North Star hung bright above falling snow, permanent against temporary chaos. Inside, laughter rose above conversation, children's voices mixing with adults, the particular sound of community being community without trying to be anything else. Garrett thought about the journey from that first morning when Thea arrived with news of inheritance. How impossible it had seemed, how overwhelming the responsibility. How many times he'd nearly given up, nearly accepted the easier path of selling and walking away. But staying when staying was hardest had taught him something crucial. The opposite of broken isn't fixed. It's held. People don't need perfection. They need presence. They don't need solutions. They need someone willing to keep the door open while they find their own way through. Somewhere upstairs a child laughed. In the kitchen, bread dough rose beneath clean towels. In the workshop, a veteran sanded wood with careful attention to grain. In the main room, men sat together in silence or conversation, both equally valuable, both equally welcome. This was the inheritance. Not property or money or even the building itself, but the understanding that we save each other by showing up, by staying by, refusing to lock doors just because easier to keep them closed. The storm would pass, as storms always did. Morning would bring shoveling and digging out and the ordinary work of continuing. But tonight, with snow falling and warmth holding and people safe within walls built for exactly this purpose, Garrett felt something he'd thought lost forever. Not happiness that was too simple, too small for what moved through him, but peace, the kind that comes from knowing you're doing what you were meant to do in the place you were meant to be, with people who need you as much as you need them. Maverick lifted his head, looked at Garrett with amber eyes that held wisdom, earned through years of watching and waiting. The dog's tail moved, once slowly, approval or agreement or simply acknowledgement that the long watch had succeeded. Outside, the North Star blazed steady, guiding home everyone still lost, promising that some lights never dim, some doors never close, some places never stop being exactly what people need them to be. Inside, the lodge lived, and Garrett Stone, who'd inherited purpose disguised as property, finally understood what his father and Thomas had known all along. We don't build monuments to the past. We build sanctuaries for the future. And we keep them standing not through strength, but through the simple, profound act of staying when everyone else walks away. The fire crackled. Snow fell. People breathed easy in rooms designed for exactly this breathing. And the North Star Lodge, renewed and ready, held steady against the dark, keeping its promises one open door at a time.